Why loneliness is a modern illusion, and how Buddhism solves it. Loneliness feels like a simple fact. I am here, and the world is over there. But what if that distance is not reality? What if it's something the mind manufactures? In the Buddha's view, suffering doesn't begin because life is empty. It begins because the mind keeps trying to feed on contact, attention, identity. And when it can't feed enough, it calls that hunger loneliness. So the solution is not merely more people, more messages, more noise. The solution is to understand the mechanism, how the mind builds separation, moment by moment, and how to stop building it. We are not one. 25 years ago, one of my teachers, Ajaan Chah, led a meditation retreat in Massachusetts for which I served as translator. During a group interview session one afternoon, a retreatant new to Buddhism quipped, "You guys would have a good religion here if only you had a God. That way, people would have some sense of support in their practice when things aren't going well." Ajaan Chah's gentle reply has stayed with me ever since. If there were a God who could arrange that, by my taking a mouthful of food, all the beings in the world would become full, I'd bow down to that God. But I haven't found anyone like that yet. There are two main reasons why these words have continued to resonate with me. One is that they're such an elegant argument against the existence of an all-powerful, all-merciful creator. Look at the way life survives, by feeding on other life. The need to eat entails unavoidable suffering, not only for those who are eaten, but also for those who feed, because we are never free of the need to feed. Wouldn't an all-powerful, all-merciful creator have come up with a better design for life than this? The other reason is that Ajaan Chah indirectly addressed an idea, often but wrongly, attributed to the Buddha, that we are all one, and that our organic oneness is something to celebrate. If we really were one, wouldn't our stomachs interconnect so that the nourishment of one person nourished everyone else? As it is, my act of feeding can often deprive someone else of food. My need to keep feeding requires that other living beings keep working hard to produce food. In many cases, when one being feeds, others die in the process. Oneness, for most beings, means not sharing a stomach, but winding up in someone else's stomach and being absorbed into that someone else's bloodstream. Hardly cause for celebration. The Buddha himself never taught that we are all one. A Brahmin once asked him, "Is everything a oneness? Is everything a plurality?" The Buddha replied that both views are extremes to be avoided. SN 1248. He didn't explain to the Brahmin why we should avoid the extreme view that all is oneness. But three other passages in the Pali Canon suggest the reasons for his position. In AN 1029, he says that the highest non-dual state a meditator can master is to experience consciousness as an unlimited, non-dual totality. Everything seems one with your awareness in that experience, yet even in that state, there is still change and inconstancy. In other words, it doesn't end suffering. Like everything else conditioned and fabricated, it has to be viewed with dispassion and, ultimately, abandoned. In SN 3580, the Buddha states that in order to relinquish ignorance and give rise to clear knowing, one has to see all things, all the senses and their objects, as something other or separate, as not self. To see all things as one would thus block the knowledge leading to awakening. And in MN 22, he singles out the view that the self is identical with the cosmos as particularly foolish. If the cosmos is your true self, he reasoned, then the workings of the cosmos would be yours to control. But how much control do you have over your immediate surroundings, let alone the whole cosmos? As Ajaan Lee once said, "Try cutting down your neighbor's tree and see whether there's going to be trouble. Taken together, These three passages suggest that the Buddha wanted to avoid the view that everything is a oneness because it doesn't put an end to suffering, because seeing all things as one gets in the way of awakening, and because the idea of oneness simply doesn't square with the way things actually are. But even though the Buddha didn't tell the Brahmin why he avoided the extreme of oneness, he did tell him how to avoid it. By adopting the teaching on dependent co-arising, his explanation of the causal interactions that lead to suffering. Ironically, dependent co-arising is often interpreted in modern Buddhist circles as the Buddha's affirmation of oneness and the interconnectedness of all beings. But this interpretation doesn't take into account the Buddha's own dismissal of oneness, and it blurs two important distinctions. The first distinction is between the notions of oneness and interconnectedness. Just because we live in an interconnected system dependent on one another doesn't mean that we're one. To be one, at least in a way worth celebrating, the whole system should be working toward the good of every member in the system. But in nature's grand ecosystem, one member survives only by feeding, physically and mentally, on other members. It's hard, even heartless, to say that nature works for the common good of all. The Buddha pointed to this fact in a short series of questions aimed at introducing Dhamma to newcomers, KHP 4. The questions follow the pattern: what is one, what is two, all the way to what is 10. Most of the answers are unsurprising. 4, for example, is the Four Noble Truths. 8, the Noble Eightfold Path. The surprise lies in the answer to what is one. All beings subsist on food. Instead of saying that all beings are one, this answer focuses on something we all have in common, yet which underscores our lack of oneness. We all need to feed, and we feed on one another. In fact, this is the Buddha's basic image for introducing the topic of interdependent causality. Causal relationships are feeding relationships. To be interdependent is to inter-eat. Later generations of Buddhists replaced this image with others more benign, suggesting that interdependence involves nothing more weighty than reflected light. A net with jewels at every interstice of the net, each jewel reflecting all the other jewels. Or a lamp surrounded by mirrors, each mirror reflecting not only the light of the lamp, but also the light reflected from every other mirror. The dazzling beauty of the interacting light beams sounds like something to celebrate, but these images don't accurately portray the actual facts of interdependence. Our lives are not spent in a continual interplay of emitting and reflecting light. We're individual beings with individual stomachs, perpetually hungry. We never have enough of feeding off of one another. This is nothing to celebrate. Instead, as the Buddha states in AN 1027, the proper response to all this inter-eating is one of disenchantment and dispassion, leading the mind to gain release from the need to feed. The second distinction that gets blurred when dependent co-arising is portrayed as the Buddha's affirmation of oneness is the distinction between what might be called outer connections and inner ones. The connections among living beings on the one hand, and those among the events within each being's awareness on the other. When you look at the series of events actually listed in dependent co-arising, you see that it deals with the second type of interconnection and not the first. None of the causal connections are concerned with how beings are dependent on one another. Instead, every connection describes the interrelationship among events immediately present to your inner awareness, your sense of your body and mind from the inside, the intimate part of your awareness you can't share with anyone else. These connections include such things as the dependence of consciousness on mental fabrication, of feelings on sensory contact, and of clinging on craving. So the interdependence here is not between you and other beings. It's between all the experiences exclusively inside you. Just as I can't enter your visual awareness to see if your sense of blue looks like my sense of blue, I can't directly experience your experience of any of the factors of dependent co-arising. Likewise, you can't directly experience mine. Even when I'm feeling a sense of oneness with all beings, you, despite the fact that you're one of those beings, can't directly feel how that feeling feels to me. In other words, instead of describing a shared area of experience, dependent co-arising deals precisely with what none of us holds in common. Even when the Buddha describes dependent co-arising as an explanation of the origination of the world, SN 1244, we have to remember that world for him means the world of your experience at the six senses, SN 3582. So here too, the factors of dependent co-arising are all an affair of your experience as sensed from within. The main message here is that suffering, which is something you directly experience from within, is caused by other factors that you experience from within, as long as you approach them unskillfully, but it can also be cured from within if you learn how to approach them with skill. In fact, suffering can only be cured from within. My lack of skill is something that only I can overcome through practice. This is why each of us has to find awakening for ourselves and experience it for ourselves. The Buddha's term for this is pakatam. This is also why no one, even with the most compassionate intentions, can gain awakening for anyone else. The best any Buddha can do is to point the way, in hopes that we'll be willing to listen to his advice and act on it. Now, this is not to say that the Buddha didn't recognize our connections with one another, simply that he described them in another context, his teaching on karma. Karma isn't radically separate from dependent co-arising. The Buddha defined karma as intention, and intention is one of the sub-factors in the causal chain, but it does have two sides. When you give rise to an intention, no one else can feel how that intention feels to you. That's the inner side of the intention, the side in the context of dependent co-arising. But when your intention leads you to act in word and deed, that's its outer side, the side that ripples out into the world. This outer side of intention is what the Buddha was referring to when he said that we are kama bandhu, related through our actions, AN 557. My relation to you is determined by the things I have done to you and that you have done to me. We're related not by what we inherently are, but by what we choose to do. Of course, given the wide range of things that people choose to do to and for one another, from very loving to very cruel, this picture of interconnectedness is not very reassuring. Because we're always hungry, the need to feed can often trump the desire to relate to one another well. At the same time, interconnectedness through action places more demands on individual people. It requires us to be very careful, at the very least, not to create bad interconnections through breaking the precepts under any conditions. The vision of interconnectedness through oneness, in contrast, is much less specific in the duties it places on people, and often implies that as long as you believe in oneness, your feelings can be trusted as to what is right or wrong, and that, ultimately, the vastness of oneness will set aright any mistakes we make. Because interconnectedness through karma is not very reassuring on the one hand and very demanding on the other, it's easy to see the appeal of a notion of oneness benevolently designed to take care of us all in spite of our actions, and why that notion can appear to be a more compassionate teaching than interconnectedness through action, in that it provides a more comforting vision of the world and is more forgiving around the precepts. But actually, the principle of interconnectedness through our actions is the more compassionate teaching of the two, both in showing more compassion to the people to whom it's taught and in giving them better reasons to act toward others in compassionate ways. To begin with, interconnectedness through karma allows for freedom of choice, whereas oneness doesn't. If we were really all parts of a larger organic oneness, how could any of us determine what role we would play within that oneness? It would be like a stomach suddenly deciding to switch jobs with the liver or to go on strike. The organism would die. At most, the stomach is free simply to act in line with its inner drives as a stomach. But even then, given the constant back and forth among all parts of an organic oneness, no part of a larger whole can lay independent claim even to its drives. When a stomach starts secreting digestive juices, the signal comes from somewhere else. So it's not really free. For the Buddha, any teaching that denies the possibility of freedom of choice contradicts itself and negates the possibility of an end to suffering. If people aren't free to choose their actions, to develop skillful actions and abandon unskillful ones, then why teach them? AN 219. How could they choose to follow a path to the end of suffering? At the same time, if you tell people that what they experience in the present is independent of what they choose to do in the present, you leave them defenseless in the face of their own desires and the desires of others. AN 362. Karma, however, despite the common misperception that it teaches fatalism, actually teaches freedom of choice, and in particular, our freedom to choose our actions right here and now. It's because of this freedom that the Buddha found the path to awakening and saw benefits in teaching that path to others. The notion of oneness precludes not only everyday freedom of choice, but also the larger freedom to gain total release from the system of intereating. This is why some teachings on oneness aim at making you feel more comfortable about staying within the system and banishing any thought of leaving it. If what you are is defined in terms of your role in the system, you can't leave it, and you'll make sure that no one else tries to leave the system either. It may require that you sleep in the middle of a road heavy with the traffic of aging, illness, and death. But with a few pillows and blankets and friendly companions, you won't feel so lonely. But the Buddha didn't start with a definition of what people are. He began by exploring what we can do. And he found, through his own efforts, that human effort can lead to true happiness outside of the system by following a course of action, the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to the end of action. That is, to release from the need to feed and be fed on. Because each of us is trapped in the system of interconnectedness by our own actions, only we, as individuals, can break out by acting in increasingly skillful ways. The Buddha and members of the Noble Sangha can show us the way, but actual skillfulness is something we have to develop on our own. If they find us trying to sleep in the middle of the road, they won't persuade us to stay there. And they won't try to make us feel ashamed for wanting to get out of the road to find a happiness that's harmless and safe. They'll kindly point the way out. So, to teach people interconnectedness through karma is an act of greater compassion than teaching them interconnectedness through oneness, and it gives them better reasons to be compassionate themselves. On the surface, oneness would seem to offer good incentives for compassion. You should be kind to others because they're no less you than your lungs or your legs. But when you realize the implications of oneness, that it misrepresents the facts of how interconnectedness works and offers no room for freedom of choice, you see that it gives you poor guidance as to which acts would have a compassionate effect on the system and denies your ability to choose whether to act compassionately in the first place. Even worse, if all things are parts of a larger organic oneness, then the evil we witness in the world must have its organic role in that oneness too. So how can we say that it's wrong? It may actually be serving the inscrutable purposes of the larger whole. And in a theory like this, which ultimately undermines concepts of right and wrong, good and evil, what basis is there for saying that a particular act is compassionate or not? The teaching on karma, though, makes compassion very specific. It gives a realistic picture of how interconnectedness works. It affirms both your freedom to choose your actions and your ability to influence the world through your intentions. And it gives clear guidelines as to which actions are compassionate and which are not. Its primary message is that the most compassionate course of action is to practice for your own awakening. Some writers worry that this message devalues the world, making people more likely to mistreat the environment. But no one has ever fracked his way to Nibbana. The path to awakening involves generosity, virtue, and the skills of meditation, which include developing attitudes of unlimited goodwill and compassion. You can't leave the system of intereating by abusing it. In fact, the more you abuse it, the more it sucks you in. To free yourself, you have to treat it well, and part of treating it well means learning how to develop your own inner food sources of concentration and discernment. When these inner foods have been developed to the full, the mind will gain access to a further dimension outside of the food chain. In that way, you remove your mouth from the feeding frenzy and show others that they can too. What's uncompassionate about that? Now, for most of us, the path to awakening will involve many lifetimes, which is another reason to treat the world well. If we're in this for the long term, we have to eat with good manners, so that we'll be able to eat well for however long it takes. If we mistreat others, we'll be reborn into a world where we're mistreated. If we're wasteful of the world's resources, we'll be reborn into a wasted world. Because we'll be returning to the world we leave behind, we should leave it in good shape. In the meantime, though, by following the path, we're taking care of business inside, and this too is an act of compassion to others. One of the most heart-rending things in the world to witness is a person deeply in pain who can't be reached, a young baby crying inconsolably, an ill person on her deathbed, delirious and distraught. You want to reach into their hearts and take out a share of the pain so as to lessen it, but you can't. Their pain is precisely at the level of their experience defined by dependent co-arising, the area of awareness that they can't share with anyone else and that no one else can enter to change. This is why seeing their pain hurts us so. We're helpless in the face of the chasm between us, glaring proof that we are not one. Someday, of course, we'll be in their position. If we can take responsibility now for ourselves on the inner level, learning how not to be overcome by pleasure or pain and not deceived by our cravings and perceptions, we won't suffer then, even during the pain leading up to death. As a result, we won't tear unnecessarily at the feelings of the people around us. This means that even though we can't transfer the food in our mouths to fill their stomachs, we'll at least not burden their hearts. And in mastering that skill, we give a gift both to others and to ourselves. Perspectives and priorities. The ideal life for practicing the Dhamma is one where you can find solitude. Now, there are many levels of solitude. There's physical solitude, mental solitude, and what the commentaries call solitude from your paraphernalia. In other words, the possessions of the mind, the defilements in the mind. The canon talks about the first two. When you get away from other people, it's easier to see your issues because when you're with other people, their issues tend to take over. What's pressing for them and what presses on you from them may not necessarily be all that important or useful for you. So it's good to get away to find some quiet time so that you can look at who you're palling around with inside. The Buddha says, we tend to pal around with our cravings, so you want to be able to look at them and see that you really don't want to maintain a friendship with them anymore. As Ajaan Chah would often say, we have things backwards. We regard suffering as an enemy and our cravings as our friends, not realizing that the cravings lead to the sufferings. Or, in Ajaan Chah's image, craving is like the tail of a snake, suffering is like the teeth. We look at the tail and we don't see that it has any teeth, so we think it's okay to catch the snake by the tail, but actually the tail and the teeth are connected. You catch a snake by the tail, it bites you. To get back to Ajaan Chah's image, we have to learn how to see craving as our enemy and suffering as our friend, because we can learn from suffering. We learn about the mind, how it relates to pains, how it relates to the disappointments in life. You begin to see the power of your perceptions. that there are certain ways of perceiving pain as being totally separate from your awareness, in which case it can be there, but your awareness is not affected. This is why in meditation, the seclusion we develop is based not only on tranquility, but also on insight. You begin to ask questions about the perceptions you have around pain. They may be pretty primordial because many of them we developed back before we even knew language. We had ways of communicating with our own minds that didn't have language, so some of the images we have around pain, our understandings around pain, come from that time. As long as they're not questioned, they're going to operate underground and have power in your mind. This is why some of the questions sound strange. Is the pain the same thing as the part of the body in which you feel it? Normally, you would say no. But if you actually look at how you approach pain, you realize that that's how you see it. So, you remind yourself, your sense of the body is what the Buddha calls form. Pain is something else. It's a feeling. The body is made up of sensations of earth, water, wind, fire, or, in other words, solidity, liquidity, energy, warmth. But the pain is something else. Just try to look at it that way. Or you can ask yourself, where is the sharpest point of the pain? Most of us run away from that sharpest point. But if you turn on it and chase it down, you find that it moves around. It evades you. If you keep following it and showing that you're not afraid of it, after a while the pain will separate out from the body and separate out from your awareness. Or you can ask yourself, is the pain solid? Or does it come in moments? Look at it carefully, and you'll see that it does come and go in moments. And it doesn't have a shape. Its shape changes all the time because, after all, it's not a physical thing. It's a feeling. It doesn't really have a shape at all. Outside of the shape, our perceptions slap onto it. And when those moments arise, are they coming at you or are they going away? These are some of the questions you can ask. If you have the energy, which is one of the reasons why concentration is also an important part of the seclusion. Just getting the mind really quiet so that it can gather its energies. The concentration and the tranquility. That's the settling in and the stillness. The insight comes from asking questions. You want to make sure the questions are well informed, because it is possible to be in seclusion and start asking some useless questions or talking to yourself in useless ways. Think of the Buddha's image of the man in the tower, secluded from the people below, looking down at the people below. Standing up in the tower, if you're not informed with right view, you could come up with all kinds of ideas about the people you see down in the ground below. He says that ideally, you want to develop a sense of samvega and also a sense of compassion, because some people who separate themselves out from humanity and look at humanity at large get some other weird ideas that are not that helpful. It's like that cartoon where a group of people are standing on a viewing platform on top of a skyscraper. There's an anteater among them. The anteater turns to one of the people and says, "Doesn't this make you feel hungry, looking down?" That's because the anteater sees everybody as ants. And, well, ants are its food. In the same way, some people, when they get separated from the rest of humanity and are alone, see humanity as food to feed on. So you want to watch out for that tendency. You have to remember that you're one of them when you're down there, and how you treat people is going to become your karma. This is why the Buddha recommends, as part of a daily practice, not only seclusion but also right view. This requires that you listen to the Dhamma regularly. You learn some of the chants so that they become part of your inner concert, the mind song, as the Ajaan Chah would say. We have so many strange songs that go running through our heads. If you memorize some of the chants, you provide yourself with some better ones. A lot of these songs hang around because they fit in with the rhythm of your breathing, the rhythm of your walking, the rhythm of your heart. So find some chants that fit in with the rhythm of your heart. Memorize those and listen to the Dhamma regularly to straighten out your views. That really helps put things into perspective. The other things that the Buddha recommends are virtue, in other words, holding to the precepts, restraint of the senses, and restraint over your conversation. In all these cases, you're watching over your mind, you're watching over your behavior. It's good to have that sense that you're being observed all the time and you want to train your inner observer to be good. All too often, we hear mindfulness practices described as putting aside your inner critic and just accepting everything. But look at what the Buddha says concerning the qualities of mindfulness. Mindfulness itself is the ability to keep something in mind. And you don't just keep it in mind as a decoration of the mind. It's supposed to inform your actions. You're alert to look at what you're doing, how it fits in with what the Buddha had to say about what kind of actions are appropriate, what kind of conversation is appropriate. When you're looking at things, listening to things, who should be doing the looking and listening? Your greed, aversion, delusion, and your irritation, or your wisdom? You want to keep in mind what the Buddha had to say about these things. That's a wise inner critic. Then you want to be alert, watching what you're actually doing so you can check to make sure that it is in line with the Buddha's teachings. Here the inner critic plays a role again. This may seem like a lot, but here again, this is why we have seclusion to fall back on. If you can't make time for long periods of meditation, then take little meditation breaks as you go through the day. Have some time just to step away and let the mind rest. After resting, you come out, and you're coming from a different perspective, one that's not so totally immersed in the world. You're up in that tower, and you're not an anteater. You're a human being looking at human beings. That's how you keep your priorities straight. That's a lot of what applying the Dhamma to your life is all about, having a sense of priorities. The Buddha doesn't say that you shouldn't have any desires or comforts in life. He said that as long as the comforts in life don't have a bad effect on your mind, go ahead and enjoy them. In fact, he said that the ability to enjoy the pleasures of life, as long as they're in line with the Dhamma, is an important part of training the mind. If you can't enjoy those pleasures, it's hard to have goodwill for others. It's hard to have empathetic joy for others because you're jealous of their pleasures. So, as long as your pleasures are in line with the Dhamma, fine, but have a strong sense of what is and isn't in line with the Dhamma, and hold yourself to a high standard. Someone informed me recently of a Dhamma talk by someone else called Lower Your Standards. I didn't even want to listen to the talk. The title was enough to show that it was wrong. You have to raise your standards. You're training that inner critic to be helpful. Ideally, you'd like to have, as your inner voice, the voice of one of the noble ones. Your mindfulness, your alertness, try to make them noble. It's a word we don't hear often. Like that time I gave a Dhamma talk way back during my first years here in California. In the talk, I happened to mention the word dignity. After the talk, a woman in the group came up. She was a Russian immigrant. She told me that she had been in America for about 10 years. She had learned the word dignity in English class back in Russia, but she had never heard it used here. That tells you a lot. We want to think of living a life in a way that is noble, that has dignity, that is honorable. A good way to start is to seek seclusion and to develop right view, to keep things in perspective. That way, we can look back at our lives and have a strong sense that we kept our priorities straight. When you have that sense, it's a good thing to take with you. There are so many other things in the world that they use to force their priorities on you, but then the rewards are nothing you can hold on to. They slip through your fingers like water. You want noble rewards that sustain you, that don't let you down. Admirable friendship. Practicing the Dhamma is primarily an issue of looking at yourself, looking at your own thoughts, your own words, your own deeds, seeing what's skillful, seeing what's not. It's not so much an issue of self-improvement as one of action improvement, word improvement, and thought improvement. This is an important distinction because people in the modern world, especially in the modern world, seem to be obsessed with self-image. We've spent our lives bombarded with images, and you can't help but compare your image of yourself to the images of people you see outside you. And for the most part, there's no comparison. You're not as strong, as beautiful, as wealthy, as stylish, and so forth. I noticed in Thailand that as soon as television became rampant, teenagers became very sullen. I think it's largely this issue of people's looking at themselves in comparison to the images broadcast at them. And the whole question of self-image becomes very sensitive, very painful. So when we say that you're looking at yourself, remember, you're not looking at yourself. You're looking at your thoughts, words, and deeds. Try to look at them as objectively as possible. Get the whole issue of self out of the way, and then it becomes a lot easier to make improvements. The same applies to your dealings with other people. The Buddha said there are two factors that help most in the arising of discernment, that help you most along the path. The foremost internal factor is appropriate attention. The foremost external factor is admirable friendship, and it's important that you reflect on what admirable friendship means, because even though you're supposed to be looking at your own thoughts, words, and deeds, you're also looking at the thoughts, words, and deeds of the people around you. After all, your eyes are fixed in your body so that they point outside. You can't help but see what other people are doing. So the question is how you can make this knowledge most useful to yourself as you practice. And this is where the principle of admirable friendship comes in. To begin with, it means associating with admirable people. People who have admirable habits, people who have qualities that are worthy of admiration. One list puts these qualities at 4. Admirable people have conviction in the principle of karma. They're virtuous, they're generous, and they're discerning. There's a well-known line from Dogen where he says, "When you walk through the mist, your robe gets wet without your even thinking about it." That's his description of living with a teacher. You pick up the teacher's habits without thinking about it. But that can be a double-edged sword because your teacher can have both good and bad habits, and you need to be careful about which ones you pick up. So in addition to associating with admirable people, the Buddha says there are 2 further factors in admirable friendship. One is that you ask these people about issues of conviction, virtue, generosity, discernment. And this doesn't necessarily mean just asking the teacher. You can ask other people in the community who have admirable qualities as well. See what special insights they have on how to develop those qualities. After all, they've obviously got experience, and you'd be wise to pick their brains. The second factor is that if you see anything in other people worth emulating, you emulate it, you follow it, you bring that quality into your own behavior. So this makes you responsible for your end of admirable friendship too. You can't sit around simply hoping to soak up the mist, waiting for it to blow your way. You have to be active. Remember that passage in the Dhammapada about the spoon not knowing the taste of the soup, while the tongue does know the taste. But again, when looking at people around you, it's important that you get away from your sense of competitiveness, of this person versus that person. You look, not at them, but at their activities. Otherwise, you start comparing yourself to the other person. This person's better than I am. That person's worse than I am. And that brings in questions of conceit, resentment, and competition, which are not really helpful because we're not here to compete with each other. We're here to work on ourselves. So again, look at other people simply in terms of their thoughts, their words, their actions, and see what's an admirable action. What are admirable words? What are admirable ideas? Ones you can emulate, ones you can pick up. In this way, the fact that we're living together becomes a help to the practice rather than a hindrance. The same is true when you notice people around you doing things that are not so admirable. Instead of judging the other person, simply judge the actions by their results. That particular action, that particular way of thinking or speaking is not very skillful, for it obviously leads to this or that undesirable result. And then turn around and look at yourself, at the things you do, and say, are those unskillful words and actions to be found in you? Look at the behavior of other people as a mirror for your own behavior. When you do this, even the difficulties of living in a community become an aid to the practice. The Buddha designed the monkhood so that monks would have time alone but also have time together. If you spent all of your time alone, you'd probably go crazy. If you spent all of your time together, life would start getting more and more like dorm life all the time. So you have to learn how to balance the two. Learn how to develop your own good qualities on your own, and at the same time use the actions and words of other people as mirrors for yourself, to check yourself, to see what out there is worth emulating, to see what out there is clearly unskillful, and then reflect on yourself. Do I have those admirable qualities? Do I have those unskillful qualities in my thoughts, words, and deeds? If you've got those unskillful qualities, you've got work to do. If you don't have the admirable ones, you've got work to do there as well. What's interesting is that in both of these internal and external factors, both in appropriate attention and in admirable friendship, one of the crucial factors is questioning. In other words, in appropriate attention, you learn how to ask yourself questions about your own actions. In admirable friendship, you ask the other people you admire about the qualities they embody. If you find someone whose conviction is admirable, you ask that person about conviction. If you find someone whose effort and persistence are admirable, you ask him about persistence. In other words, you take an interest in these things. The things that we ask questions about, those are the things we're interested in. Those are the things that direct our practice. And it's the combination of the two, the internal questioning and the external questioning, that gets us pointed in the right direction. So this is something to think about as you go through the day and you see someone else doing something that gets you upset or something that offends you. Don't focus on the other person. Focus on the action in and of itself as part of a causal process, and then turn around and look at yourself. If, in your mind, you create other people out there, you create a lot of problems. But if you simply see life in the community as an opportunity to watch the principle of cause and effect as it plays itself out, the problems vanish. The same with admirable people. You don't get jealous of their good qualities. You don't get depressed about the fact that you don't have their good qualities. Where do good qualities come from? They come from persistence, from effort, from training, which is something we can all do. So again, if you see something admirable in other people, ask them about it, and then try to apply those lessons in your own life. If we go through life without asking questions, we learn nothing. If we ask the wrong questions, we go off the path. If, with practice, we learn how to ask the right questions, that's the factor that helps us get our practice right on target. I once read a man's reminiscences about his childhood in which he said that every day when he'd come home from school, his mother's first question would be, "What questions did you ask in school today?" She didn't ask, "What did you learn? What did the teacher teach?" She asked, "What questions did you ask?" She was teaching him to think. So at the end of the day, when you stop to reflect on the day's activities, that's a good question to ask yourself. What questions did I ask today? What answers did I get? That way, you get to see which direction your practice is going.